Abigail Carter's hands were already bleeding when they dragged her into the square. Not from a fight she started, from a rope she never agreed to wear. Her father was 3 days in the ground, and the men who smiled at his funeral were now standing in front of her with a document they called legal. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She looked at every face in that crowd, and not one of them looked back. That was the moment she understood. She was already buried. They just hadn't told her yet. If this story already has you gripping your seat, subscribe to this channel right now and follow every single part to the end, because nothing about what happens next is simple. And drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. The morning Abigail Carter's father was lowered into the ground, Mayor Harold Caldwell stood at the back of the churchyard with his hat in his hands and his eyes on the property line. She noticed. She noticed the way he looked at the fence posts, not the coffin. The way his son Preston stood beside him, already measuring something with his gaze that had nothing to do with grief. The way neither of them spoke a word to her, not a condolence, not a nod, not even the basic human courtesy of eye contact with a woman who had just lost the only family she had left in the world. 3 days later, they came for the land. It wasn't subtle. It was never meant to be. 2 men arrived before sunrise when the dew was still heavy on the grass and the light was the color of old copper. They tied their horses at her father's fence post, and knocked on the door of the house her grandfather had built with his own hands before the war. Abigail answered it with a rifle, not raised, just present. The taller of the 2 men, a dull-eyed enforcer named Russ, who worked directly for Preston Caldwell and made no secret of it, looked at the rifle, looked at her, and smiled in the way men smile when they've already decided a woman isn't serious. "Miss Carter," he said, "the mayor sends his regards." "Tell the mayor his regards aren't welcome before breakfast," she said, "or after it." Russ reached into his coat and produced a folded document. He held it out like it was already settled. "Debt notice," he said. "Your father borrowed against this land. Payments come due." Abigail didn't take the paper. "My father didn't borrow anything. Records say different." "Then the records are wrong." Russ shrugged, slow theatrical, the shrug of a man performing patience for an audience that wasn't there. "Ma'am, the bank holds the lien. The mayor's office has verified the documentation. All you need to do is sign the transfer and you'll be compensated fair." "Fair," she repeated. "Fair." She looked at him for a long moment. Then at the second man, who hadn't said a word, and kept his hand near his hip like a habit he'd stopped thinking about. "Get off my land," she said. She closed the door. She stood with her back against it and listened to them ride away, and she didn't let herself shake until the sound of hoofbeats had fully disappeared. Then she let herself shake. Because she knew what came next. She knew the way a person knows a storm by the quality of the air before it arrives, that this was not over. That Russ going back empty-handed didn't mean defeat, it meant escalation. It meant that whatever Harold Caldwell had planned for the Carter land, he'd simply move to the next phase. She sat down at her father's desk, pulled out every document she could find. Deeds, tax receipts, letters, the original land grant handwritten in ink so old it had turned the color of rust. Her father's handwriting in the margins, careful, deliberate, a man who trusted paper because paper didn't lie the way people did. She went through everything twice. There was no debt, no lien, no borrowing. The land was clear and had been clear for 30 years, since her grandfather paid the last dollar on the original note and shook hands with a banker who was long since dead and buried. Whatever document Russ had been carrying, whatever the Caldwell machine was calling a legal debt notice, it was a fabrication. A piece of paper built to look official enough that most people wouldn't question it. Most people in Oak Haven Abigail had learned had a complicated relationship with questioning the Caldwells. She didn't sleep that night. She sat at her father's desk with a candle burning low and read every word she had, looking for something she could use. Something that would hold up. Something that couldn't be dismissed or buried or rewritten by men with more money and more patience and more willingness to play a long game than anyone around them. By morning, she had a plan. It wasn't a good plan, but it was the only one available to a woman alone on a piece of land that powerful men had already decided belonged to them. She would go to town. She would go to the bank. She would stand in front of whoever held whatever fraudulent document they were calling a lien, and she would demand to see the original. The signature, the date, the chain of custody. She would make them show their work. She saddled her horse at first light, tucked the land grant into her saddlebag, and rode the 4 miles to Oak Haven with her back straight and her jaw set and absolutely no plan for what would happen if the bank simply refused to speak with her, which, as it turned out, was exactly what happened. The bank manager's name was Fowler. He was a small man who had worked for the Caldwells, not officially, never officially, but in the way that a certain kind of man in a certain kind of town worked for the family that held the most notes and the most influence and the most willingness to make life difficult for those who declined to cooperate. He met her in the lobby, not his office. The lobby. Already a message. "Miss Carter," he said. And the way he said it communicated that he'd been briefed, that he'd been waiting, that this conversation had already been decided before she walked through the door. "I understand you have some concerns about the notice." "I have concerns about a fraudulent lien on land my family has owned free and clear for 3 decades, she said. Her voice was level. She'd practiced level. "I'd like to see the original documentation." Fowler folded his hands. "The documentation is in order." "I'd like to see it." "The bank's records are not available for public review." "I'm not the public. I'm the landowner named in the notice." Fowler's expression didn't change, which itself was a kind of answer. The expression of a man who had said no to harder people than her, and found it easier each time. "The debt is valid," he said. "The transfer notice has been filed. You have 30 days to comply, or the matter goes to the county sheriff for enforcement." "What sheriff?" she said. "You mean Deputy Hicks, who's worked for Mayor Caldwell since before he was deputy?" Fowler blinked. Just once. "Ma'am, show me the original note," she said. "Show me my father's signature. Show me the date it was filed and the name of the officer who witnessed it." Long pause. "That's not something I'm able to do at this time." "Then we're done here," she said. She turned to leave and found that she couldn't. Not because anyone had moved to block her. Not yet. But because the door opened and Preston Caldwell walked in. And behind him came Russ, and behind Russ came 2 more men, and the lobby of the Oak Haven Savings and Trust became in the space of 15 seconds something that no longer felt like a bank. Preston was 28 years old and had spent every one of those years learning how to carry his father's authority in his own body. He was tall, the way buildings are tall, not naturally but structurally, deliberately. He looked at Abigail the way people look at problems they've already solved. "Miss Carter," he said, "I heard you came to ask questions." "I came for documentation," she said. "Documentation." He smiled. "That's a very formal word for a Tuesday morning. It's a formal situation." He walked closer. Not quite threatening. Plausible deniability required a margin, but close enough that she had to choose between holding her ground and stepping back. She held her ground. "Your father," Preston said, "was a good man. I want you to know that. My family had a great deal of respect for him." "Your family killed him," she said. The lobby went very quiet. Preston's smile didn't break. That was the worst part. It didn't break because it had never been real to begin with, and a thing that was never real couldn't be destroyed. "That's a serious accusation," he said softly. "Prove me wrong." Another pause. Then, "I think you should take the 30 days, Miss Carter. Think it over. Talk to someone. Come to a reasonable conclusion." He tilted his head. "Oak Haven is a good town, full of good people. Nobody here wants to see a woman in your position make things harder than they need to be." She didn't answer. She walked out. And she heard behind her Preston say something quiet to Russ in a tone that she didn't catch the words of, but understood completely. The 30 days had just gotten shorter. They came for her in the square. Not at her land where she could have defended herself with terrain and preparation. Not at night where at least darkness would have given her options. In the square, in front of everyone. High summer noon when the sun was at its most unforgiving, and every person in Oak Haven who had business in town was either present or visible from a window, and the audience was exactly as large and exactly as useless as the Caldwells needed it to be. Russ and 3 men arrived at her horse while she was coming out of the general store with a bag of flour and a box of cartridges and absolutely no warning. They moved fast, practiced. The flour hit the ground. Her arms were pinned before she could reach for anything. The cartridges scattered across the boardwalk planks like small copper accusations. And then her wrists were together, and the rope was being tied, and she was being pulled physically moved. Her boots dragging across the dirt toward the center of the square. She didn't scream. She thought about it. She rejected it. Screaming was what they wanted. Screaming confirmed the narrative they were building. Hysterical woman, emotional woman who couldn't be reasoned with and therefore needed to be managed. So she kept her jaw clamped and her breathing controlled, and she walked as much as she was dragged, and she looked at the people around her with every step. The blacksmith who had known her father for 20 years. The woman who ran the dress shop, who had measured Abigail for her confirmation dress when she was 12. The school teacher. The preacher. The men who had worked Carter land during harvest seasons when her father needed extra hands. Every single one of them looked away. Not all at once. Individually. One by one, as her eyes found them, they found something else to look at. The ground. Their hands. The middle distance. The inside of their own conscience apparently was more bearable to examine than the outside of what was happening. That silence, that active, deliberate, chosen silence, settled into Abigail Carter's chest and stayed there. She filed it. She would remember every face. Mayor Harold Caldwell stood in the center of the square like a man who had rehearsed this moment and found it satisfying. He was 60 years old and had been running Oak Haven for 22 of them, and he carried that tenure the way other men carry a weapon openly, casually, as both tool and warning. He held the transfer document. 1 page. Everything the Carter family had ever built or owned or fought to keep reduced to 1 page, and a line that needed a signature. "Miss Carter," he said loud enough for the audience. "I'm sorry it's come to this. I truly am." She said nothing. "Your father was a proud man. I respected that. But pride doesn't satisfy a debt, and the law doesn't make exceptions for grief." Still nothing. "All I'm asking." He stepped closer, lowered his voice just slightly, made it almost intimate, almost kind. "Is for you to sign. Take the compensation. Start somewhere new. There's no shame in it." She looked at the document, then at him. "There's nothing but shame in it," she said. His expression shifted just for a fraction of a second, just enough to reveal something underneath the rehearsed sorrow that looked a great deal more like irritation. "Sign it," he said. "Quieter now. No more performance. Just instruction." "No." The word landed in the square like something dropped from a height. Caldwell's jaw tightened. Russ stepped forward. And somewhere behind her, from the edge of the square, from a direction she couldn't immediately place, a voice broke the afternoon open. Low. Unhurried. Carrying the kind of quiet authority that doesn't come from titles or money, but from a person who has lived long enough in hard places to know that volume is almost never necessary. "Seems like a lot of effort," the voice said, "for a simple debt collection." She didn't turn right away. She made herself not turn, because turning would have meant taking her eyes off Caldwell, and she wasn't ready to give him the relief of her attention moving elsewhere. But she heard the footsteps. Slow, even. The walk of someone who was not rushing because rushing implied urgency, and urgency implied that the situation had any power over them, and this person had apparently decided well before arriving that it did not. Preston Caldwell turned first. "This is a private matter," he said. "Private matters don't usually happen in public squares," the voice said. He came into her peripheral vision then, And when she finally turned, she understood something immediately, the way you understand certain things, not from information, but from the whole accumulated weight of a person's presence. He was not from here, not in the way that was obvious. Different clothes, different accent, different name. In a deeper way. In the way that a man who has spent years in high country carries himself differently than men who've spent those same years in towns. Like he'd been shaped by something that didn't negotiate with comfort. Tall. Lean in the way work makes a person lean, rather than the way vanity does. A face that had been weathered by altitude and season, and she suspected by things that had nothing to do with weather. A hat pushed back enough that she could see his eyes clearly, and his eyes were doing something specific. They were looking at her. Not at Caldwell, not at the document, not at Russ or the men behind him, or the audience of people who had chosen each of them to find something else to see. At her, like she was the only relevant thing in the square. "Is this woman accused of a crime?" he asked, still addressing the air more than any specific person. Like he was asking the town itself. Caldwell stepped forward. "Who are you?" "Passing through," the man said simply. "Name's Hayes, Caleb Hayes." He looked at the rope on her wrists, then back at Caldwell. "Is she accused of a crime?" "She owes a debt." "That's not what I asked." The square was very still. Caldwell's voice dropped into something harder. "You'd do well to ride on Mr. Hayes." "Probably," Caleb said. "But then I'd spend a long time wondering about the answer to my question." He took one step forward. Just one. Easy. Like he was walking across a field. "Is she accused of a crime?" No one answered. Because there was no legal answer. Because debt collection. Even fraudulent debt collection didn't involve ropes and public squares. And 4 armed men and everyone present, including Harold Caldwell, knew it. And the knowing of it was the whole reason the silence stretched as long as it did. "Didn't think so," Caleb said. He moved. Not fast. Not the way men move in stories when they're trying to be impressive. He moved the way someone moves when they've made a decision, and the decision is simple, and there's no particular drama attached to it. Just physics. Just the shortest path between 2 points. Russ stepped into that path. What happened was brief, and when it was over, Russ was on the ground and Caleb was standing next to Abigail with a knife in his hand. A working knife worn at the handle. The knife of a man who used it for practical things, and the rope fell from her wrists in 2 pieces. Her hands dropped. The blood rushed back into her fingers like a small private fire. She flexed them once. Twice. And then she looked at Caleb Hayes, who had already folded the knife away and was looking at Caldwell with an expression that was not hostile and not triumphant and not particularly anything except present. "You'll regret this," Caldwell said. "Most things worth doing carry some regret," Caleb said. "That's how you know they mattered." He looked at Abigail. Not a question. "More like your call." She reached into the saddlebag of the nearest horse, her horse the one Russ's men had taken when they grabbed her still standing where they'd tied it, and pulled out the land documents she'd been carrying since dawn. She looked at Caldwell. "These are the originals," she said. "My grandfather's signature. 30 years of tax receipts. The paid note." She held them up so everyone could see. "And not one of them has a single debt recorded against this land." The square was quiet enough that she could hear the summer wind moving through it. Caldwell's face did something complicated. Preston behind him put his hand near his hip. Caleb noticed. "I wouldn't," he said. Quiet. Final. Preston's hand stilled. "This isn't over," Caldwell said. "No," Abigail said. "It isn't." She put the documents back in the bag. She gathered her reins. She looked at the faces around her, the blacksmith, the schoolteacher, the woman from the dress shop. All the people who had looked away when they should have looked forward. And she held each of their gazes for exactly as long as she needed to. Then she looked at Caleb Hayes. "I'm going to need to ride fast," she said. He glanced behind them. Preston was already talking to the men. Quietly. with the focused energy of someone redirecting a problem rather than abandoning it. "Yes," Caleb said. "You are." "You don't have to come." He picked up his own reins. "No," he said. "I don't." He didn't say anything else. He didn't have to. She rode north. He rode beside her, and behind them, Oak Haven. The town that had watched her be dragged and said nothing. The town that had let a fraudulent document be called justice and called that normal began slowly to recede. She didn't look back, not once, but she felt it the whole way. The weight of all that deliberate silence, following her out of town like something she hadn't managed to outride. Not yet. They rode hard for the first mile without speaking. That was fine. Words would have been wrong anyway. Wrong rhythm, wrong weight, wrong for the kind of silence that had settled between two people who had just done something irreversible together and were still processing the full meaning of it. Abigail kept her eyes forward and her hands steady on the reins and counted the things she knew. She knew Preston Caldwell had been talking to his men before she and Caleb cleared the square. She knew the Caldwell operation had at least 8 riders on retainer. She'd counted them over the past 3 weeks, without meaning to the way a person counts exits in a room they don't feel safe in. She knew her land was 4 miles south and therefore useless to her now. Going back meant walking into exactly the trap they'd just walked out of. And she knew in the way you know things that live in the body rather than the mind, that the man riding beside her was the single reason she still had her hands free and her documents intact, and any options at all. She glanced at him. He was watching the terrain ahead, with the particular quality of attention she was starting to recognize as his default state. Not tense, not relaxed. Something in between that suggested constant low-level processing, the kind of awareness that becomes automatic in a person who has spent years somewhere that punished inattention. "You said you were passing through," she said. "I did." Passing through from where? A pause. Not evasion, more like a man deciding whether the question deserved precision or just honesty. "High country," he said. "North Range. I come down a few times a summer for supplies." "How long have you been coming to Oak Haven?" 3 years. "You know what Caldwell is?" It wasn't a question. He didn't treat it like one. "I know what men like him are," he said. "Seen enough of them." She looked at him for a moment longer than was probably sensible, given that she was on a horse moving at speed. "Then why today? Why that specific moment?" He took a while with that one. "You didn't look scared," he finally said. She almost laughed. "I was terrified." "I know." He glanced at her sideways. "That's different from looking it. Most people in that square were scared too. They showed it by looking away. You showed it by looking straight at every single one of them." Another pause. That seemed like something that deserved to not be ignored. Abigail turned back to the trail ahead. She didn't have an answer for that. Or rather, she had too many, and none of them felt right to say out loud to a man she'd known for approximately 40 minutes. So she rode, and he rode beside her. And the summer afternoon pressed down on them both, with its full, indifferent weight, and behind them, though neither of them had looked back in 10 minutes, Oak Haven was already becoming something that lived in the past tense. The first sound of pursuit reached them about 20 minutes north of town. Not hoofbeats yet. Something earlier, the particular quality of disturbed air that comes before sound fully arrives if you've trained yourself to notice it. Caleb noticed it. She could tell by the way his posture shifted, fractional, almost invisible but real. "How many?" she asked. "Can't say yet." He tilted his head slightly, listening. 5, maybe more. She processed that. "My land is south. My documents are the only legal leverage I have. If they get them, they won't. You don't know that." "No," he agreed. "But worrying about it won't change the arithmetic." He looked at her steadily. "Do you trust the documents more than you trust yourself?" She blinked. "What?" "You know what's in them. You know what they prove. Even if they burned every piece of paper you're carrying, you know the truth. That's harder to take than paper." She stared at him. "That's either very wise," she said, Or it's something a person says when they don't understand how courts work. Probably some of both, he said without any particular apology. She almost smiled. Then the hoofbeats arrived. Distinct now. Close enough to count not 5, she thought. More like 7. Moving fast and not trying to hide the fact of their movement, which meant Preston wasn't interested in subtlety. Preston was interested in overtaking. North, Caleb said. I know. There's a creek crossing about 2 miles up. Shallow this time of year. I grew up here, she said. I know the creek. A beat. Right, he said. There's a ridge past it, she said. Switchbacks. Slows horses down if you don't know the footing. Do they know it? Preston's men are mostly hired from outside the county, she said. They know the main roads. And we don't take the main roads. We absolutely do not take the main roads. He nodded once. They pushed harder. The creek came up fast. She could hear it before she saw it. The low summer run barely audible over the hoofbeats, and she aimed her horse at the narrowest point and trusted the animal's instincts and held on. The splash was cold, even in summer heat. Her boots soaked through. She didn't slow down. Caleb crossed beside her like he'd done it 1,000 times, which she was beginning to suspect he possibly had. Past the creek, the trail changed character. It stopped being a trail in any reasonable sense and became something more geological, a seam in the terrain that people who knew it followed by memory rather than by sight. She followed it the way she'd followed it since she was 12 years old, riding out with her father on mornings when the world felt big enough to get lost in. She thought about her father now for exactly 3 seconds. Then she put it away. Later. She would have the grief later. Right now, it would slow her down, and she could not afford to be slowed. Behind them, the hoofbeats hit the creek. She heard at least 2 horses balk at the crossing, splashing a shout, a rider cursing the animal's reluctance. Good. Unknown water in uncertain depth made even confident horses cautious. That was 30 seconds, maybe 45. She used every one of them. The switchbacks were everything she'd remembered. Narrow enough that you had to take them single file, angled steeply enough that the footing demanded attention, and utterly unremarkable to anyone who didn't already know they existed. From the main road, which Preston's men would hit in about 4 minutes, if they abandoned the creek crossing and swung around, the whole ridge just looked like terrain. She and Caleb dismounted at the first switchback without discussing it and led their horses up by hand. Faster, safer, less noise. He fell into the rhythm of it immediately. She noticed. You've done this before, she said. Quiet sound carried strangely in the rocks. Moved through unfamiliar country. Moved through it like it was already familiar. He glanced at her from the other side of his horse. 6 years in high country. You learn to read terrain the same way you learn to read people. There's a logic to it. What's the logic here? Elevation favors the patient. The men behind us are riding emotion, Preston's anger, the momentum of the chase. Emotion burns fuel faster than calculation. He paused at a narrow passage, guided his horse through with a hand flat against its flank. We calculate. They burn. She filed that. You sound like a man who's been chased before, she said. A very long pause. I've been on both sides of it, he said. She looked at him. He didn't offer more, and she, who understood implicitly that certain things are offered when ready and demanded, never didn't push. They reached the top of the ridge as the sun moved past its highest point, tipping the light into something slightly less brutal. Below them, at the base of the switchbacks, she could hear the Caldwell riders moving along the creek bank, calling to each other. The sound of men who had lost the thread and were trying to find it by being loud about the search. She and Caleb stood quiet. Their horses stood quiet. The riders moved east, the wrong direction. She let out a breath she'd been holding for 20 minutes. Now what? She asked. Caleb looked north, then at her. How long can you stay off your land? Indefinitely if necessary. I have nothing there they haven't already decided is theirs. Do you have anyone, family, friends, someone outside Oak Haven you trust? She thought about it seriously the way the question deserved. My father's sister lives in Mill Haven, 2 days' ride east. But she's old, and I won't put her in the middle of this. Anyone else? There was a man who used to work for my father, Tom Aldridge. He left Oak Haven 8 months ago after Caldwell pressured him off a different piece of land. He settled near Ridgecrest. Ridgecrest, Caleb thought. Northwest. Yes. How far? Day and a half if the weather holds. He looked at the sky the way people look at it when they have enough experience with weather to read it as text. Weather'll hold, he said, but a day and a half is a long time in open country with Preston's men looking. What do you suggest? He was quiet for a moment. Thinking, not performing thinking, actually doing it, which she was learning, was the difference between him and most men she'd encountered in rooms where decisions were being made. I have a cabin, he said. North Range, about half a day's ride from here. Remote enough that no one from Oak Haven knows it exists. We can stop there. Rest the horses, think through what documentation you have and what you need. She looked at him. He looked back. Calm. Straightforward. The look of a man making a practical offer and attaching no weight to it beyond practicality. A cabin, she said. Yes. Your cabin. My cabin. She held his gaze. Mr. Hayes. Caleb. Caleb, she paused. I don't know you. No, he agreed. You don't? I know you helped me today. I know you can read terrain and handle yourself, and you ride like someone who means it. Beyond that, you're a stranger. That's accurate. So explain to me, she said, why I should follow a stranger into a remote cabin in the mountains. He was quiet for a moment. Then, because the alternative is open country, with 7 riders who work for a man who just publicly tried to strip you of your land with a fraudulent document, and who, based on how Preston was talking to his men when we left, has moved this from a legal problem to a personal one. She said nothing. And because, he continued with the same level calm, if I had intended you harm, it would have been a great deal more convenient to let Russ handle it back in that square and ride on. She thought about that. He was right. She hated that he was right, not because she wanted him to be wrong, but because being right meant she had to trust it. And trust was a thing that had taken significant damage in the last 3 weeks, and didn't have a lot of reserve left. Half a day's ride, she said. Yes. And from there, we think about what comes next. Yes. Another pause. Caleb. Yeah. If this turns out to be a mistake, she said, I want you to know that I will make it extremely difficult for you. For the first time, something shifted in his expression. Not a full smile, something smaller than that, something that suggested a smile existed somewhere in his range, but didn't deploy casually. Noted, he said. They rode north. The afternoon moved with them. Long summer light at this elevation, going gold in the way that high country light went, gold painting everything in the quality of something just before it changes. She rode and thought and cataloged everything she knew and everything she needed and everything that had gone wrong in the 3 weeks since her father died and the Caldwell machine decided his death was an opportunity. Her father had known. That was the thing she kept coming back to. In the last weeks of his life, when illness had already made him smaller than he'd ever been. He had told her quietly on a morning when they both knew there wasn't much morning left that Harold Caldwell had been watching the Carter land for years. That there had been conversations, offers, polite suggestions that had become impolite pressure, that had become something he didn't want to name in front of her. She'd told him they'd deal with it. She'd told him not to worry. She'd told him she could handle whatever came. She had believed it. She still believed it. But she was also becoming clear-eyed about the shape of what came, and the shape was larger than she'd estimated. Caldwell wasn't just a corrupt mayor extracting one property. She'd understood that much from Fowler at the bank, from the way he'd said the bank's records are not available for public review, with the fluency of someone who had said it many times before. From the way Preston had walked into that lobby, like a man doing maintenance on a system not resolving an exceptional situation. How many other properties? How many other families who had received debt notices that didn't correspond to any actual debt? How many Tom Aldridge's men who'd been pressured and relocated and absorbed into the geography of a town that had learned not to ask? She was still working through the architecture of it when Caleb spoke. "You're thinking hard," he said. "I'm thinking usefully," she corrected. "What are you thinking about?" She hesitated, then decided honesty was more efficient than privacy. "I'm thinking this is bigger than my land. I'm thinking Caldwell's been doing this for years to multiple families with enough institutional infrastructure that the bank, the deputy, and apparently most of the town are either complicit or willfully ignorant." Caleb didn't respond immediately. "And," he said, "and a woman with a land deed and a correct answer doesn't solve that, not by herself." She looked at him. "I need something federal, someone outside Caldwell's reach. The county's compromised and the state is slow, but if I can get the documentation to a federal land office—" "Or a federal agent," Caleb said. She turned to look at him. There was something specific in his voice, not casual, not incidental. "You know someone," she said. A pause. "I know of someone," he said carefully. "Man named Siringo. Charles Siringo. He's Pinkerton, but he's been working with the Federal Land Office on property fraud cases in this territory for 2 years. She stared. "How do you know that?" Another pause, longer this time. "Because," Caleb said, "6 years ago I lost a piece of land too. Different state, different family running the same machine." He looked straight ahead. "I spent 2 years trying to fight it the way you're fighting it. Local records, legal documentation, right answers in rooms full of wrong people. What happened? I lost," he said simply. "And then I went to the mountains. And eventually I heard about Siringo." He paused. "He got the men who took my land. Took 3 years, but he got them." The air between them changed slightly. Not warm exactly, but different. Like something that had been held at a careful distance had moved a half step closer. "Why didn't you mention this in Oak Haven?" she said. "Because you didn't know me in Oak Haven," he said. "You still barely know me now. Information like that given at the wrong time to the wrong person gets back to Caldwell in an hour. I wanted to know which direction you were actually going before I pointed at anything." She thought about that. "Which direction am I actually going?" she asked. He looked at her. "Forward," he said. "You're going forward. That's the only direction you know." She looked away, because that was too accurate to respond to without emotion, and she wasn't ready to have emotion in front of him. Not yet. They were still riding when the sound came. Not from behind this time, from the side. From a dry creek bed to the east that she knew ran parallel to this trail for about a quarter mile before it curved away and currently had 2 riders in it moving at speed, cutting the angle on them, trying to come around front. Caleb heard it the same moment she did. "They split," she said. "Preston's smarter than I gave him credit for," Caleb said with something that might have been professional acknowledgement in someone else. "He had them circle wide while the others searched the creek." "Means he knows this terrain better than you thought." She shook her head. "Or he guessed, or—" She stopped. "Tom Aldridge mentioned the ridge to me once at my father's house. Dinner conversation. Preston was there. So he knew about the switchbacks." "Possibly. Probably." She looked east. The riders weren't visible yet, but they would be in the next 30 seconds. "How far to your cabin?" 3 hours at current pace." "We don't have 3 hours at current pace." "No," he agreed. "So what do we do?" He was already looking around, not frantically methodically the way a man takes inventory rather than panics. "There's a place," he said. "Old mining claim. Been abandoned 15 years at least. Half-mile north and east of us. Solid structure, defensible position, and it's not on any current map." "How do you know about it?" "I shelter there sometimes in bad weather," he said. "Coming down from high country." "And Preston's men won't know it." "If they're going off maps and local knowledge," he said. "No." She looked east. The first rider broke from the creek bed. Brown horse. Dark jacket. Moving fast and already pointing directly at them. "He sees us," she said. "Yes." "Half mile." "Yes." "We'll be running the whole way." "Yes," Caleb said. And then, with the same level calm he'd had since the moment he walked into Oakhaven Square, "Can you run?" She looked at him. "Watch me," she said. She pushed her horse hard. He matched her instantly. Behind them, and now alarmingly also to the east, the Caldwell riders came. The half-mile to the mining claim was not a comfortable half-mile. It was the kind of half-mile that existed in the gap between bad decisions and worse ones that required commitment over calculation, that asked a horse and its rider to operate as a single organism with a single focus. She rode it like she'd been born to it. Because she had been. Carter land backed up against territory, like this rocky, uneven, beautiful, in a way that punished inattention, and she had ridden it since she was old enough to sit a horse without falling off. Her father had made sure of that. Had said more than once, "Abigail, a woman who knows the land she stands on, has a kind of power nobody can deed away." She understood that now in a way she hadn't then. The mining claim appeared through a stand of timber that had grown up around it in the years since anyone had used it regularly, old enough that the trees had some height to them, young enough that she could tell they'd been saplings within living memory. The structure itself was low and dark, and looked like it had given up on impressing anyone sometime around 1870, and had simply decided to be functional instead. Caleb was off his horse and at the door before she'd fully stopped. The door opened. Dark inside. The smell of old wood and dust and something mineral she couldn't name. She got her horse around the side of the building to where a leaning post offered at least token concealment, tied him fast, and came back to the door in under 45 seconds. Caleb pulled it shut behind her. They stood in the dark and listened. Outside hoofbeats. 2 horses, then 3 moving past the timber stand at speed. Going north. Following the trail they'd left, which bent north and east, and would occupy the riders for at least another quarter-mile before they started wondering why the tracks stopped making sense. Silence. Then more silence. Then a shout from somewhere distant, a rider calling to another rider, the sound of coordination happening at a volume that meant it wasn't happening close. She let out a breath. He didn't. He was still listening. She waited. 30 seconds. A minute. The kind of minute that takes up a disproportionate amount of subjective time. Finally he moved. Not much, just a slight release of tension across his shoulders. Barely perceptible. She perceived it anyway. "They passed," she said. "For now," he said. "They'll double back when the tracks end. 30 minutes, maybe 45. She thought through it. Not enough time to reach your cabin. No, but enough time to think. "Yes," he said. "Enough for that." In the near dark of the abandoned mining claim, with the Caldwell riders somewhere north, and the sun moving toward a horizon she couldn't see, Abigail Carter sat down on what had once been a workbench, and put the saddlebag on her knees, and opened it, and looked at the documents her father had spent 30 years accumulating. Everything he'd built, everything he'd trusted, paper to protect. She looked at Caleb. "Tell me about Siringo," she said. "Everything you know." He sat down across from her, and he did. Siringo's name sat in the air between them for a moment after Caleb finished speaking. Abigail turned it over in her mind, the way she turned over everything, methodically looking for the weak points first, because the weak points were always where the truth lived. "Pinkerton," she said. "Yes." "Pinkerton works for money. Whoever pays them gets them." "That's the reputation," Caleb said. "Siringo's different. He spent 3 years embedded with the Wild Bunch, not for a corporation, for the Federal Land Office. He's got his own code, and it doesn't bend toward the highest bidder. You know this personally. I know it from the outcome," he said. "The men who took my land in Colorado are in federal prison. Siringo put them there. He had every reason to take a settlement from the family running that operation. They offered him twice his annual wage to walk away." A pause. "He didn't walk away." Abigail looked at him. "How do you reach him?" "He moves. But there's a contact in Ridgecrest. A woman named Clara Boone, who runs a boarding house. She's been a relay point for Pinkerton's federal work for years. You send word through her, Siringo gets it within a week. A week, she said. Give or take. She looked at the documents on her knees. We need to get to Ridgecrest. Day and a half east, he said. Same as you said. Through open country. Most of it. With Preston's men still running patterns. Yes. She thought for a moment. Outside, the light coming through the gaps in the old mining claims walls had shifted gold, moving toward amber afternoon, surrendering to early evening. The riders hadn't doubled back yet, but they would. There's another problem, she said. Caleb waited. Tom Aldridge, she said. I mentioned him to you. He lives near Ridgecrest. He worked my father's land for 6 years, and he left Oak Haven when Caldwell's machine came for his property. She paused. He saw things. He was there for conversations I wasn't present for. Things my father never fully told me. What kind of things? My father said Caldwell had been watching the Carter land for years, but Tom was there when some of those conversations happened, when men came to the property making offers, when papers were pushed across tables, and my father pushed them back. She looked up. If Tom will talk, he's not just a witness to what happened to him. He's a witness to a pattern. Caleb was quiet for a moment. A pattern, he repeated. That's what Siringo needs, not one property, not one debt notice. A documented pattern across multiple families over multiple years. Exactly. She held his gaze. Which means Ridgecrest is necessary for 2 reasons now. Clara Boone and Tom Aldridge. Then we go to Ridgecrest, he said. Simply. No hesitation. She studied him. You keep making that sound easy. It isn't easy, he said. But it's clear. Clear is easier to act on than complicated. She almost said something to that, held it back, then said it anyway. What do you get out of this, Caleb? He looked at her with an expression that was hard to read, not because it was concealed, but because it was genuinely complicated, the expression of a man answering a question that had multiple true answers and was deciding which one was most honest. I told you what happened in Colorado, he said. Yes. I spent 6 years in those mountains, partly because I didn't know what to do with what happened, with losing, with the fact that a system that was supposed to prevent that kind of thing let it happen anyway. He paused. When I saw you in that square today, not scared, not begging, looking every person in that crowd directly in the eye, I thought maybe the thing I was supposed to do with 6 years of being angry about Colorado was be somewhere useful when it happened again. The mining claim was very quiet. That's an honest answer, she said. Only kind I know, he said. She looked at the documents again, then closed the saddlebag. We should move before they double back. Yes, he said. He was already standing. They moved. The first mile east was careful and slow, picking through terrain that offered cover over speed, trading time for concealment. She followed his lead on this without argument, because he was right that this was his kind of country, and she was right that this wasn't the moment for pride about it. Her mind kept working, while her hands and her horse did the mechanical business of moving. She thought about her father. About the specific morning 2 months before he died, when he'd come inside from the fence line with his jaw set, in a way she recognized from childhood, as the jaw of a man who had just been pushed, and was deciding whether to push back. She'd asked him what happened. He'd said nothing, Abigail. She'd known it wasn't nothing. 2 weeks later, he'd told her about Caldwell's interest in the land. But she suspected now that the fence line incident had been something more specific. Something she still didn't have the full shape of. Tom Aldridge might know. She held on to that. They rode east through the long summer evening, the light softening around them in the way it softened at elevation, gradually, generously, as if the day was reluctant to end. She'd always loved this time of year in this country. The way the heat stayed present, but the edge came off it. The way everything smelled like something living rather than something burning. She didn't want to leave it, but she thought with a clarity that surprised her with its steadiness. I'm not leaving it. I'm fighting for it. There's a difference. Her father would have said that. She wrote it like a flag. They camped when the light made riding genuinely risky. A cold camp, no fire, tucked against a granite outcropping that blocked the wind and offered a clear sightline in both directions. Caleb pulled jerky and dried biscuit from his saddlebag and offered half without ceremony. She took it without ceremony. They ate in silence that was comfortable in the specific way that silence becomes comfortable between two people who have already been through something together and don't need to narrate it. "How long were you married?" she asked. He looked up. She'd surprised herself with the question, but it had been forming somewhere below conscious thought since the mining claim, since he'd talked about Colorado and 6 years in the mountains, and the particular quality of a man who has rearranged his life around a loss that wasn't only about land. 4 years, he said, after a moment. She died in the 3rd year we were there. Fever. She said nothing. He said nothing. Then, her name was Ruth. She was the one who wanted the Colorado land. I would have been happy anywhere. A pause. She saw something in that particular place. Something worth putting down roots for. "I'm sorry," Abigail said. "It was a long time ago." "Time doesn't really work like that," she said. He looked at her. She looked back. "No," he said quietly. "It doesn't." She thought about her father, about the fence, about mornings that were also a long time ago now technically, and felt like this morning technically, and both things were simultaneously true. "Get some sleep," Caleb said. "I'll take first watch." "You don't have to." "I know," he said. "Get some sleep, Abigail." She lay back against her saddle and looked at the sky and listened to the country making its night sounds and thought about nothing specific until she was asleep. She woke to his hand on her shoulder, not rough, just present. She was awake fully in under 2 seconds, the sleep of someone whose nervous system had been running high all day, light and provisional and ready. "Riders," he said quietly. "West, moving slow." She sat up. "How far?" "Quarter mile, maybe less." "They're searching, not chasing." "Yes, which means they've lost the track and they're running a pattern," she thought fast. "If they're running a systematic pattern west to east, they'll cross our position in 20 minutes, he said, unless they hit something that redirects them. Like what? He was already moving. Like a fire they didn't expect. She blinked. "You said cold camp." "I said we'd camp cold," he said. "I didn't say we'd stay cold." He looked at her with that level, unreadable expression. "There's a dry wash 200 yards north. If I build a small fire there and they see it, they'll go north to investigate. And we go east. Fast." She thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. "Do it." He moved. She broke camp. By the time she had both horses ready, he was back, barely winded, moving with the unhurried efficiency that she was starting to understand was simply his natural operating speed. "It's lit," he said. "Small. Looks like a traveler's fire." "Will they believe it?" "Desperate men believe what they want to find," he said. "Right now they want to find us north." "Then let's make sure we're east," she said. They rode, hard and quiet and east through the dark, using the stars and her memory and his terrain sense in combination, a kind of navigation that didn't feel like calculation, felt like conversation. The two of them making adjustments and reading conditions and moving through the night like they'd been doing it together for years instead of hours. She didn't examine that too closely. Behind them, she heard very faint moving north, the sound of the search party redirecting. The fire had worked. She exhaled. "Good thinking," she said. "Old trick," he said. "From Colorado." A pause. "From before Colorado." She didn't ask what that meant. She decided she would ask, but later. When they had more road behind them, and more safety ahead of them, and the luxury of a conversation that didn't have to be conducted at a canter in the dark. Later, they rode until first light began to show itself in the east, a tentative gray that preceded color by about 20 minutes and made everything look provisional, like the world deciding whether to commit to another day. She felt it when the terrain changed, not dramatically. Subtly, the way the ground held differently under the horse's hooves, the way the sound of the morning changed register slightly. They were transitioning from the mountain approach into something lower and wider and less forgiving. "We're getting close to open country," she said. "Next 6 miles," he confirmed. "No real cover until we hit the timber north of Ridgecrest." 6 miles of open. "How far out is Preston's reach?" she asked. "Practically. Does he have contacts in Ridgecrest?" "I don't know," Caleb said. "Do you?" She thought about it carefully. Caldwell's operation is Oak Haven-based. His bank connections run through the county seat, which is east, but Ridgecrest is further east than his primary territory. She paused. "That doesn't mean he has no reach there, just that it's thinner." "Thinner is better than nothing." "Yes. Then we move fast through the open, and we don't stop," he said. "No reason to linger. We get to Ridgecrest, we find Aldridge, we find Boone's boarding house, and we do it all before anyone who might be watching gets a long enough look to send word back." She nodded. They pushed into the open country as the sun arrived, fully a hot summer morning, promising the kind of day that made everything visible and left nowhere to hide. She felt the exposure as a physical thing, the way open ground after cover always registered in the body before the mind had processed the change. Her shoulders tightened. Her awareness expanded outward. Caleb rode slightly ahead on the open stretch, not dominating reading. His head moved at intervals, checking angles, his body carrying that constant low processing she'd observed since the square. She found herself trusting it in a way she didn't entirely understand and had stopped questioning. They were 4 miles into the open when the rider appeared. Single. Coming from the south. Not fast, not a chase, not a pursuit, but angled toward them with too much purpose to be coincidental. Her hand moved toward her rifle. Caleb's hand moved first, not toward a weapon, toward her arm. A brief light pressure. Hold. "Watch," he said quietly. She watched. The rider came close enough for details. Young, maybe 20. Dusty and tired-looking, like someone who'd been riding since the previous afternoon. He raised a hand as he came, and she understood the gesture of a man communicating non-threat. He pulled up 10 feet away. "You the woman from Oak Haven?" he asked, looking at Abigail. "Carter." Her spine went rigid. "Who's asking?" "Tom Aldridge sent me," the young man said. "Name's Eddie. I work at his place near Ridgecrest." He pulled a folded paper from his jacket. "Tom heard something came down in Oak Haven yesterday. He sent me to ride the county road and see if I could find you before Caldwell's men did." She stared. "How did he know?" she asked. "Oak Haven's got a telegraph," Eddie said. "And not everybody in that town works for Caldwell. Tom's got a friend still there, a woman at the post office. She sent word the moment the situation went south in the square." Caleb took the letter. He looked at Abigail, held it out. She opened it. Tom Aldridge's handwriting, she recognized it from years of payroll receipts, from notes left on fence posts during harvest season. The same tight, careful script. "Abigail, come directly. Don't go through town center. Use the South Creek Road, you'll know it. I've got something your father gave me for safekeeping 2 years ago and told me to hold until it was necessary. It's necessary. Tom," she read it twice, then a third time. "Something your father gave me for safekeeping 2 years ago," which meant before the illness. When he was still healthy and sharp and thinking clearly, when he'd already understood that Harold Caldwell's interest in Carter land was not going to resolve itself graciously, when he'd taken steps she hadn't known about. Her father had known. Not just in the vague way she'd understood not just Caldwell's been watching things might get difficult. He'd known specifically, concretely. Specifically enough to give Tom Aldridge something to hold. Something important enough to safeguard with someone he trusted who was outside the immediate blast radius of whatever was coming. Her eyes stung. She didn't let them do more than that. "Tell Tom we're coming," she said to Eddie. "South Creek Road," Eddie confirmed. "He'll have someone watching for you." He turned his horse and rode south. She and Caleb looked at each other. "Your father knew," Caleb said. Yes, she said. Her voice was even. She was making it even. He knew a long time before I thought he did. Whatever he left with Aldridge. Could be everything, she said. Or it could be nothing. I don't know yet. But it changes the shape of what we bring to Syringo. If it's what I think it might be, she said carefully, it changes everything. She didn't say what she thought it might be. Not yet. Because saying it out loud before she had it in her hands felt like the kind of hope that could break you if the ground shifted under it, and she'd had enough ground shifting under her in the past 3 weeks to last a considerable while. South Creek Road, she said. How far? Eddie came from the south, Caleb said. Means Tom's spread is that direction. If the creek road is what I think it is, we cut south from here and pick it up in about 2 miles. Let's go, she said. They rode south. The morning opened around them in full summer force. The heat coming up from the ground now, as well as down from the sky, that particular enclosed warmth of a midsummer day in open country that made everything feel both more urgent and more real. She rode through it and thought about her father, and about what he'd known, and when he'd known it, and why he hadn't told her. She knew why. She didn't want to know why, but she knew. Because he'd wanted to protect her from carrying it. Because he'd looked at his daughter and made the father's calculation that had been made about her since she was a child, that she was capable, that she was strong, that she could handle things, and then made the separate calculation that handling things had a cost, and he wanted to bear as much of that cost himself as he could, for as long as he could. He'd been wrong. She would have wanted to know. She would have wanted to carry it with him. But she understood why he'd chosen the way he'd chosen, and understanding it didn't make her angry. It made her ache in a way that was completely different from anger and considerably harder to work with. She put it somewhere interior and kept riding. The South Creek Road was exactly where Caleb thought it was. A narrow cut through bottomland timber that someone had been maintaining recently. She noticed the growth kept back in a way that suggested regular use. Tom's work or Eddie's. The road of a man expecting company. A figure appeared ahead, standing beside the trail, not mounted. Arms at his sides. The posture of someone who had been waiting long enough to be past the restless stage and into the patient one. Tom Aldridge. He was older than she remembered from the last time she'd seen him. Harder around the edges, the specific hardness that came from being displaced from a place you'd worked for years, and having to start over at an age when starting over costs more than it used to. But his eyes were the same, clear, direct, the eyes of a man who had spent years reading weather and livestock and the intentions of people with more power than him and had developed good judgment about all three. He looked at her. She looked at him. Tom, she said. Abigail, he said. And then with the weight of a man who has been holding something for a long time, and is relieved to hand it over. Your daddy was a smart man. I know, she said. Smarter than he let on, Tom said. Smarter than Caldwell gave him credit for. He reached into his jacket, pulled out an envelope. Not new. The paper was worn at the corners, handled and rehandled over however many months it had been sitting in Tom Aldridge's keeping. Her name was on the outside. Her father's handwriting. Her hands were steady when she took it. She was proud of that. She opened it. Inside were 3 things. The first was a letter in her father's hand, 2 pages dense with the careful, deliberate script of a man who understood that what he was writing might be the most important thing he'd ever written. She read the first line, and her breath went. Abigail. If you're reading this, it went the way I was afraid it would go, and I'm sorry I couldn't prevent it. She folded it back. Not yet. Not in the open, not in front of Tom and a stranger, and the complicated exposure of a summer morning. She would read it properly, when she had privacy and enough steadiness to receive it. The second thing was a document. Official-looking county seal date stamp signatures. She looked at it for a long moment, and understanding arrived slowly, then all at once. It was a sworn deposition. Her father's signature at the bottom, notarized. Dated 16 months ago. In it, Daniel Carter described in precise dated name detail 4 separate occasions on which Harold Caldwell had approached him directly about selling Carter land. The exact words used, the escalating nature of the pressure, and most importantly, the name of the bank officer who had been present during 2 of those conversations. Fowler. The same Fowler who had told her the bank's records were not available for public review. The third thing was a list. 6 names, 6 families, 6 properties in and around Oak Haven County. Beside each name, a date and a brief notation. Harmon family. Debt notice served. Transfer completed under duress. 1887. Bellamy widow. Notice served. Property transferred. 1888. Aldridge. She looked up at Tom. Notice served. Vacated. 5 others. All within 4 years, all under the same mechanism. Her father had been watching it happen, had been documenting it, had understood not in the vague way she'd first thought, but with the methodical clarity of a man who had spent years observing a pattern and writing it down, and preserving the record that what was happening to his neighbors was going to happen to him, and that when it did, someone would need the evidence. He'd built the case. She was standing inside it. "Tom," she said. Her voice was very level. "Did you read this?" "He told me not to," Tom said. "I didn't." She looked at Caleb. He was watching her with the careful attention of a man who understood that something significant had just arrived and was giving it the space it needed. 6 families, she said. Caleb's jaw tightened. "And a notarized deposition from your father," he said quietly. "Naming Caldwell, naming Fowler, dated 16 months ago." She looked at the list. "With documentation of every transfer." "Siringo," Caleb said. "Siringo," she confirmed. Tom Aldridge looked between them. "Who's Siringo?" "Someone who can use this," she said. "Someone outside Caldwell's reach." She looked at Tom. "Are you willing to talk, to give a statement you're on this list? You were pressured. You witnessed things." Tom was quiet for a moment, the silence of a man calculating risk against conscience. She waited. "Your daddy stood up for me once," Tom said finally. "Before things got bad, Caldwell's men came onto my property making noise, and your father rode over without being asked and stood next to me like it was nothing." He paused. "Didn't say much, just stood there, but they left." She said nothing. "Yes," Tom said. "I'll talk." She nodded. She looked at Caleb. He nodded back. "Clara Boone's boarding house," she said. "We need to get word to Siringo today, not tomorrow. Today. Then we go to town," Caleb said. "Preston may have someone watching." "Then we move carefully," he said, "and we move together." She looked at him. He looked back. That steadiness. That specific quality of a man who had made his decision and wasn't revisiting it. "Together," she said. It was not a word she'd used to describe herself and another person in a very long time. She was surprised by how naturally it arrived. She tucked the envelope inside her jacket close, direct against her body, the warmest place she had. Her father's words against her heartbeat. "Tom," she said. "Is there another way into Ridgecrest 1 that doesn't come through the main street?" "East side," Tom said. "Comes in behind the livery. Clara Boone's place is 2 streets north of that." "Can Eddie take us?" "Already planned on it," Tom said. She looked north toward Ridgecrest. She thought about Harold Caldwell, who had stood in Oak Haven Square that morning, certain that the Carter land was already his. Who had built a machine over 4 years and 16 families and 1 dead man's property and called it business? She thought about her father, who had spent months quietly, patiently alone building the answer. She picked up her reins. "Let's go," she said. And she rode toward the town that held the thread that would unravel everything Harold Caldwell had spent 4 years constructing, carrying her father's evidence against her heart, with a mountain man riding on her left and a witness riding behind, and the whole long summer afternoon still ahead of them. She wasn't running anymore. She was arriving. Eddie knew the east side of Ridgecrest the way a man knows a place he's navigated in the dark more than once, not by landmarks, but by feel. He took them in behind the livery without hesitation, through a narrow cut between two buildings that wasn't quite an alley and wasn't quite a road, and pulled up at a fence post that had seen better decades. "Leave the horses here," he said quietly. "Clara's place is the White House 2 streets north, blue door." "You're not coming?" Abigail asked. "Tom needs me back," Eddie said. "And 3 strangers walking into a boarding house draws less attention than 4. He looked at her with the directness of a young man who had decided she was worth being direct with. "You can trust Clara Boone. She's been holding Pinkerton mail for 3 years and nobody in this town knows it. Not even her husband." "She has a husband," Caleb said. "Had," Eddie said. "He passed 2 winters ago." A pause. "She runs the place alone now. Does it better." He turned his horse and disappeared back the way they'd come. Abigail looked at Tom. "You should stay with the horses." Tom started to argue. "Tom," she said, quietly, the way her father had said things when the discussion was over. "If Preston has someone watching this town, your face is a liability. You left Oak Haven under pressure. Anyone who knows Caldwell's operation knows you. Stay here. Keep the horses ready." Tom closed his mouth, nodded once. "Don't be long," he said. "We won't," Caleb said. They went north on foot through the back way, moving with the pace of people who had business, and weren't hiding it, not too fast, not too slow. The specific speed of unremarkable. She'd learned that from watching Caleb operate the way he calibrated his body language to communicate exactly what a situation required, and nothing more. She was learning a lot from watching Caleb operate. She filed that observation without examining it further. The blue door was exactly where Eddie said it would be, a particular shade of blue that had faded to something softer and more honest than its original paint job. She knocked twice. The woman who opened it was in her mid-50s, compact, with the clear eyes of someone who had made a study of reading people quickly and accurately. She looked at Abigail first, then Caleb, then back at Abigail. "You're Daniel Carter's daughter," she said. Abigail went still. "You knew my father." "Of him?" Clara Boone said. "Come in, quickly." The inside of the boarding house was the inside of a place run by a woman who valued order, not as an aesthetic preference, but as a practical one. Everything in its place, everything with a purpose, nothing decorative that couldn't also be useful. Clara moved through it with the efficiency of someone who had stopped thinking about the space and simply inhabited it. She closed the door, locked it, turned to face them. "I had a letter 3 weeks ago," she said, "from a contact in Oak Haven. Said Daniel Carter had died and that his daughter might be coming through Ridgecrest within the month." She looked at Abigail steadily. "I've been watching for you." Abigail's throat tightened. "Who sent the letter?" "Woman at the post office," Clara said. "I don't give names, but she's been reliable for 2 years. The same woman who'd sent word to Tom Aldridge about the square. The same thread running through Oak Haven's silence, the one person who hadn't looked away." "I need to reach Siringo," Abigail said. "Charles Siringo. I have documentation of a multi-year property fraud operation running out of Oak Haven sworn depositions. A named pattern across 6 families. Bank officer involvement." She put her hand over the envelope inside her jacket. "My father built the case. I'm delivering it." Clara looked at her for a long moment, then at Caleb. "Hayes," she said. Caleb looked at her carefully. "You know me. Siringo mentioned you. Once." Clara paused. "He said, if a man named Caleb Hayes ever came through one of his relay points, extend full cooperation." The air in the room changed. Abigail looked at Caleb. He looked not surprised exactly. Something more complicated than surprise. The expression of a man receiving information that connected to something he'd thought was further in the past than it apparently was. "When?" he said. 8 months ago, Clara said. "He didn't explain why. He doesn't explain much." A pause. But he doesn't say names without reason. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Where is he? He asked. 11 days out, Clara said. He's running an operation in the Northern Territory. But I have a telegraph code. I can send word today, and he'll have it by tonight. She looked at Abigail. He'll move fast if the documentation is what you say it is. It's more than I said it is, Abigail told her. Clara nodded once. Write it out. Everything you need him to know. I'll encode it and send it within the hour. She produced paper and a pen from a desk drawer and set them on the table without ceremony. Abigail sat down. She wrote. She wrote with the focus of someone who understood that every word had weight and space was limited, and imprecision was a luxury she didn't have. The documentation, the names, the pattern, the deposition, the bank, Fowler, the list of 6 families, the square, the fraudulent debt notice, the specific mechanism Caldwell used, and how long he'd been using it. She wrote for 12 minutes without stopping. When she finished, she read it back once. Then she handed it to Clara. Clara read it standing up. Her expression didn't change dramatically, but something in it sharpened. The particular sharpening of someone encountering a situation that is worse than they'd estimated, and therefore more important than they'd anticipated. 6 families, Clara said. That we know of, Abigail said. My father was only able to document the ones he personally witnessed or had direct knowledge of. There could be more. Yes. Clara folded the paper. I'll send this within the hour. Siringo will respond. It may take a day, maybe 2. She looked at Abigail. Can you stay in Ridgecrest that long? Caleb spoke before Abigail could answer. Does Preston Caldwell have presence here? Not that I've seen, Clara said. But Oak Haven is half a day's ride and Caldwell has money. She paused. He could have someone here I don't know about. We shouldn't stay in one place, Caleb said. Tom's spread, Abigail said, thinking it through. It's south. It's off the main road. And Tom's already willing to give testimony. We stay there. We wait for Siringo's response. We keep the documents moving if we need to. I can get word to you there, Clara said. Eddie knows how to find me. Abigail looked at her. Why are you doing this? Clara Boone set the paper down on the desk and looked back with the expression of a woman who had been asked a question she'd been carrying the answer to for a long time. My husband built a business in this county for 20 years, she said. When he died, 3 different men arrived within a month, suggesting the property ought to be handled by someone better suited to managing it. She paused. I told all 3 of them where they could go. Abigail said nothing. But I knew women who couldn't, Clara said. Knew families who couldn't. Knew what happened to them. A long pause. Somebody should have helped sooner. I do what I can now. She went to the desk. She began encoding the message. Abigail stood up and looked at Caleb. He tilted his head toward the door. They were almost out when Clara spoke without looking up from the desk. Miss Carter? Abigail stopped. Your father wrote to me, Clara said. 6 months ago, not through official channels directly. He'd heard about this relay point through Tom Aldridge. She paused in her encoding. He wanted to know if Siringo was the kind of man who could be trusted with something important. Abigail's breath stopped. What did you tell him? She asked. I told him yes, Clara said. I told him Siringo was the best option he had for what he was describing. She looked up. He wrote back and thanked me. Said he was putting something together. Said he hoped he'd have time to do it right. The envelope against Abigail's heart felt heavier than paper. He did, she said quietly. He did it right. Clara nodded. Abigail walked out into the summer afternoon with Caleb beside her and stood for a moment on the street outside the blue door, and the grief she'd been managing like a controlled burn all day moved through her in a single wave, fast, complete, and then receding before it could do damage. Her father had spent his last healthy months building the case that would protect everything he'd built. He'd known exactly what he was doing. He'd done it alone, so she wouldn't have to carry it until she was ready. She was ready now. Abigail, Caleb said. I'm fine, she said. I know, he said. I wasn't going to say you weren't. She looked at him. I was going to say we need to move, he said. Someone's been watching the north end of this street for the last 4 minutes. She didn't look. Caldwell's? Can't say for certain, young man. Doesn't look local, too deliberate about how casual he's being. Preston works fast, she said. Money works fast, Caleb said. Preston just spends it. Back way. Back way. They turned and walked back through the cut between the buildings at exactly the same unhurried pace as before. She heard him behind them. She was almost certain she heard him, the particular hesitation of someone who hadn't decided yet whether to follow, but they were back at the livery fence before the hesitation resolved into action. Tom looked up when they arrived. Read their faces. Trouble? He said. Possibly, Caleb said. We need to go. Tom was already untying horses. They were mounted and moving south inside 90 seconds. She thought about the man watching the north end of the street. Thought about how long it would take him to get a message back to Preston. Thought about what Preston would do with that message. He wouldn't come himself. Preston was the type who positioned himself behind action and directed it. He'd send riders. And he had enough of them left after the previous day to send a number that made comfortable odds uncomfortable. How many does Preston have left? She said to Caleb as they rode. After yesterday. After the creek, the switchbacks, the mining claim. Caleb thought for a moment. He started with 7 or 8 on our trail. The fire split them and sent the main group north. They'd have regrouped by this morning. He paused. He's got his full number, maybe more if he sent for reinforcements overnight. He sent for reinforcements? She said. Not a question. If I were Preston, Caleb said, and a woman escaped me with a mountain man and a saddlebag full of documents, I'd have sent for every man I could reach the moment I got back to a telegraph. Tom, riding beside them, made a low sound. How many does that add up to? Enough, Caleb said simply. Tom absorbed that. And we're going back to my place. Your place is the best option, Abigail said. It's off the main road. It's defensible. And we need to stay in one location long enough for Siringo to respond. How long? A day. Maybe 2. Tom nodded slowly. All right. He paused. I've got a rifle and 200 rounds. That's a start, Caleb said. They hit Tom's South Road at midday, the heat at its fullest and most serious, pressing down on everything with the weight of a summer that had been building for weeks. Tom's place materialized from the scrub and timber like it had grown there rather than been built a working man's operation, compact and functional with a barn that was in better shape than the house and a fence line that had been recently repaired. She noticed the fence line. Tom had been taking care of this place, getting it ready. He'd been planning to stay. She thought about what it cost a man to rebuild after being displaced once and then sit with the daily uncertainty of whether it might happen again. She thought about what it cost him to still be willing to testify. She thought she understood Tom Aldridge considerably better now than she had in all the years she'd known him. They got the horses into the barn and got water on, and Tom started coffee without being asked, moving through his kitchen with the automatic competence of a man who'd been cooking for himself long enough that it was muscle memory. Abigail sat at his table and opened the envelope. She read her father's letter. All of it. She read it once fast, needing the shape of it before the weight of it arrived, and then she read it again slowly, and the second reading was the one that cost her. He'd known. He'd known for 2 years that Caldwell intended to take the land. He'd documented everything he could. He'd made provisions he hadn't told her about because he'd wanted her to have a version of the last months that wasn't completely consumed by his fear. He'd been afraid. That was the part she hadn't known. The part she'd never seen. Her father had been afraid, and he'd kept it from her, and he'd still done every practical thing he could think of to protect her, and he'd done it alone, and the letter was not apologetic. Her father was never apologetic for decisions he'd made with clear intention. But it was honest in the specific way a man is honest when he knows he won't be able to explain himself in person. I know you would have wanted to know sooner. I know you would have said you could carry it with me. You would have been right. I made a father's mistake, and I won't pretend it was wisdom. just love badly applied. She put the letter down. She pressed her hands flat on the table. Caleb was standing near the window. He looked at her, and then looked away with the tactful precision of a man who understood that grief required witnesses who weren't watching. Tom set a cup of coffee in front of her without speaking. She drank half of it. Then she picked up the letter again and read the last paragraph. The list is 6 families that I know of. There are likely more. The deposition covers what I witnessed directly and what I can swear to. It won't be enough by itself, but it will be a foundation. Build on it, Abigail. You were always better at building than I gave you credit for. I gave you too much protection and not enough credit, and I have spent a significant portion of the last 2 years regretting that in equal measure. You'll do this right. I know you will. She folded the letter, put it back in the envelope, put the envelope back inside her jacket. The deposition names Caldwell and Fowler directly, she said. Her voice was steady. She was making it steady. It establishes a pattern of targeted pressure across at least 6 properties. Combined with Tom's testimony and the original Carter land documentation, it's a federal fraud case with documented victims and named perpetrators. She looked up at Caleb. What does Siringo need beyond that? Physical evidence of the fraudulent documents, Caleb said. The debt notices themselves ideally originals or certified copies showing they don't match any legitimate bank records. Fowler has those, she said, or controls access to them. Then we need someone inside the bank to— Wait, Tom said. They both looked at him. He was standing at the stove with an expression that meant he'd been chewing on something and had decided to spit it out. Fowler wasn't always Caldwell's man, Tom said slowly. He came to Oak Haven 6 years ago. The bank was independent then. He paused. There was a situation 3 years back, a loan that went wrong for Fowler personally. Caldwell covered it. After that, Fowler owed him, Abigail said. Yes. Tom looked at her. But I always figured Fowler knew what he was getting into, wasn't what he'd planned on. She sat very still. A man who was pressured into complicity, she said, is not the same as a man who chose it. No, Tom agreed. And a man who knows he's facing federal fraud charges, Caleb said, might make a different calculation than a man who thinks he's protected. The 3 of them looked at each other. We'd need to reach Fowler before Preston does, Abigail said, before Caldwell has a chance to close ranks. That means going back toward Oak Haven, Tom said. Not all the way, Caleb said. Does Fowler have family outside town, anywhere he goes regularly? Tom thought for a moment. He's got a sister in Cartwell. Goes every other Sunday. Has done since I knew him. When's the next Sunday? Caleb looked at Abigail. Day after tomorrow, she said. Then we have a window, he said. If Siringo responds and moves fast, if Fowler goes to Cartwell as usual, we intercept him before Caldwell's men can get to him first. Abigail finished. The plan was forming fast. Too fast, maybe the kind of momentum that felt like control and could tip into recklessness if no one slowed it. She slowed it. We don't know Fowler, she said. We don't know if he'll talk. We don't know if Caldwell has already been in contact with him since yesterday. We don't know how much Preston knows about where we are. That's a lot of unknowns, Tom said. Yes, she agreed. So we wait for Siringo's response. We don't move on Fowler until we know Siringo is coming and what he needs. We don't make a mistake we can't recover from because we're running on momentum. Caleb looked at her. That's right, he said. She looked back at him. You were about to say the same thing, she said. I was about to let you say it, he said. Tom looked between them with the expression of a man watching something he'd decided not to comment on. The afternoon wore on. She read through the documents again, all of them systematically building the complete picture her father had constructed piece by piece and left for her to assemble. Tom talked through what he'd witnessed. Caleb listened, and occasionally asked precise questions that clarified the timeline that connected one thing to another in ways that strengthened rather than complicated the chain of evidence. He was good at this. She hadn't expected that specifically. She'd seen him manage terrain and read people and make fast decisions under pressure. She hadn't expected the quiet, methodical intelligence he brought to a table covered in papers, the way he held the whole structure in his mind and saw where it needed reinforcing. "You've done investigative work," she said. Not accusingly, just recognizing. He was quiet for a moment. "Before Colorado," he said. "Before a lot of things." She waited. He looked at the documents. "I was a marshal, federal, for 8 years. A pause. "I resigned after Colorado, after I lost the land and Ruth and everything in the same year." He set down the paper he'd been holding. "I'd spent 8 years enforcing the law and then watched it fail every test that mattered when it was my situation." She absorbed that. "That's why Siringo knows your name," she said. "We worked together twice," he said. "He's the only one from that period I'd still trust." She looked at him. Caleb Hayes, former federal marshal. 6 years in the high country away from everything he'd been doing. Something she still didn't fully understand. Healing, maybe. Or just waiting without knowing what he was waiting for. Until Oak Haven. Until a square. Until a woman who didn't look scared, even when she was terrified. "Caleb," she said. He looked at her. "Thank you," she said. "Not for today. For all of it." He held her gaze for a moment. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "We haven't finished." "No," she agreed. "But I wanted to say it while we were sitting still." Something shifted in his expression. That almost smile again. The one that existed just below the surface of his face, and surfaced rarely, and only when he seemed to forget to prevent it. "Noted," he said. Tom came in from outside, moving fast. Both of them were on their feet before he spoke. "Rider coming from the North Road," Tom said. "Moving with purpose." Caleb was at the window. "One rider," he said. "Could be from Clara," Abigail said. "Could be," he said. "Or it could be someone Preston sent ahead of a larger group." "One rider doesn't look like the front of a larger group," Tom said. "No," Caleb agreed. "But it doesn't not look like it either." The rider came into the yard and pulled up. Young, not Eddie. A different young man, someone she didn't recognize, with a folded paper in his hand, and the look of someone who had ridden hard for the last hour and would like very much to stop riding hard. Tom went out. Abigail and Caleb stood inside and watched through the window. A brief exchange. Tom took the paper. The rider turned and went back north without dismounting. Tom came back in. He handed the paper to Abigail. Clara Boone's handwriting. Short and coded in the plain text Clara apparently used for non-sensitive confirmations. Message received and sent. Response arrived within 2 hours. S is moving. Estimated arrival 4 days. He says secure the deposition and the list. Get Aldridge's testimony in writing before he arrives. He'll bring authority to compel the bank records. Do not approach Caldwell or Fowler directly before he arrives. Hold position. 4 days. She read it twice. Then she looked at Caleb. "He's coming," she said. 4 days, Caleb said. "We can hold position 4 days, Tom said. "I've got provisions." And he stopped. Because from outside, from the north road, from the direction the messenger had just gone from a distance that was getting shorter, came the sound of multiple horses moving at speed. Not one rider. Not two. More. Caleb was at the window before she'd fully processed it. His expression didn't change. But his jaw said in a specific way she'd seen once before in the square when Preston had put his hand near his hip. "How many?" she asked. 8, he said. "Maybe 10. Tom said something quiet that wasn't a word she needed to repeat. Abigail looked at the document spread across the table. Her father's work, 6 families' worth of truth. The foundation of everything that was going to happen if they survived the next hour. She gathered them, every page, fast and methodical, back in the envelope inside her jacket. She looked at Caleb. "Tom," she said without looking away from Caleb, "is there a back way out of this property?" "Creek to the south," Tom said. "But they'll cover it." They'll try, Caleb said. He was watching the north road. They haven't arrived yet. They're moving fast, but they're not here. He turned from the window. 3 minutes, maybe 4. 3 minutes. She looked at Tom. The rifle and the 200 rounds. Back room, he said. Get them, she said. Tom went. She looked at Caleb. He looked back. We can't outrun 10 riders, she said. No, he agreed. And we can't fight 10 riders. Not straight on, he said. But they're riding toward this building because they think we're in it and not leaving. That's the assumption. He paused. What happens if we're not in it? Where would we be? He looked at the barn. She looked at the barn. They'll search it, she said. Yes, he said, after they've surrounded the house. Giving us time to move while they're doing that. A window, he said. Small. Small is better than none. Tom came back with the rifle and the rounds and a look on his face that said he'd heard enough through the wall to have the shape of things. I'm staying, Tom said. Abigail started to argue. No, Tom said, and his voice had the particular weight of a man who had made the calculation and was done making it. I'm on this list. I'm a witness. I'm giving a statement whether Siringo has to dig it out of me in 4 days or I give it to you now. He looked at her steadily. You take those documents and you keep them safe. That's your job. I'll handle mine. Tom. Your daddy stood next to me once when he didn't have to, Tom said. Let me return the favor. The hoofbeats were loud now. Less than 2 minutes. She looked at him. She thought of 100 things to say. She said, Don't do anything stupid. Never have yet, Tom said. She and Caleb went out the back. They went out the back, moving low and fast, crossing the open ground between the house and the barn in the 15 seconds they had before the riders cleared the north tree line and had full sight line to the property. She heard them arrive the moment she and Caleb pressed inside the barn door. The specific thunder of horses pulling up hard men, shouting to each other, the organized noise of a group that had been given instructions and was executing them with the focused energy of people being paid to be thorough. Caleb pulled the barn door to within an inch of closed. They stood in the near dark and listened. House first, a voice called outside. Not Preston. An older voice, rougher, the voice of the kind of man Preston hired to do the things Preston didn't want attached to his name. Cover the back. Nobody leaves. Boots on Tom's porch. A knock that was more announcement than request. Then Tom's voice, steady, unhurried, carrying the particular calm of a man who had decided what he was doing and was no longer negotiating with himself about it. Can I help you? Tom Aldridge? That's me. We're looking for a woman, Abigail Carter, and a man traveling with her. A pause. Tom's pause. The pause of a man who had spent years working the land and understood that silence used correctly was its own kind of answer. Can't say I know where she is, Tom said. Mind if we look around? You got paper for that, a beat. We don't need paper, the voice said. Funny, Tom said. That's what Russ told her too back in Oakhaven, before she walked out of that square with her hands free. Dead silence. Abigail pressed her hand against the barn wall and breathed very slowly. She heard the shift the moment when the men outside recalibrated, when Tom's calm resistance moved the situation from routine search to something that required a decision. Search it, the rough voice said, boots moving. More than 2 men, she counted 4 sets spreading around the house exterior. 2 stayed at the front, which meant 4 were coming toward the barn. Caleb touched her arm. She looked at him. He pointed up. The hayloft. Of course. Accessible from an interior ladder, and she looked and confirmed with a secondary opening at the back gable end that Tom used for loading hay bales from outside. Small, low clearance. Possible. She went up the ladder first. He was right behind her. Below them, the barn door opened fully. She lay flat in the hay and did not breathe. 2 men came in. She could hear them moving through the lower-level methodical checking stalls, moving equipment, the sounds of a search being conducted by people who were thorough without being particularly imaginative. They didn't look up. People almost never looked up when they were searching horizontal space. It was one of those consistent failures of human attention that Caleb had probably known about for years. One of the men said, "Clear." They went back out. She let the breath go. Caleb was already moving toward the back gable opening, examining the drop and the angles and whatever calculation he was running about what came next. "They'll finish the house search in 10 minutes," he said, very quiet. "Find nothing. Then they have a choice: leave or hold position and wait." "They'll hold," she said. "Yes. They think we're close. The messenger from Clara passed them on the road. They'd have seen him coming from this direction. Which means they know someone contacted us here," Caleb said. "Which means they know we have information about Siringo's timeline." She looked at him. "Do they know about Siringo?" "Preston's smart enough to have been asking questions since yesterday," Caleb said. "If he traced us to Ridgecrest, if he had someone watching Clara's street." He stopped. She finished it. "He knows we went to the boarding house." "He knows someone at that boarding house sends Pinkerton mail," Caleb said. "Whether he knows Siringo specifically." "He knows enough," she said. "He knows enough to want to move before federal involvement becomes real." They looked at each other in the dim light of Tom Aldridge's hayloft, with the full weight of the situation sitting between them. "He's going to move on Oak Haven," she said. "On the records. On Fowler. He's going to clean the trail." "Yes?" Caleb said. "That's exactly what he's going to do. Which means the deposition and the list are the only physical evidence that survives if he succeeds," he said. "Everything else he can reach. The bank records, Fowler's cooperation, whatever documentation exists inside Oak Haven County, he can bury all of it if he moves fast enough." She felt the pressure of the envelope against her ribs like a heartbeat. "Then he has to not move fast enough," she said. "How?" She thought hard. Faster than was comfortable. Faster than she'd have liked, with the sounds of the search concluding outside Tom's house and time compressing in the specific way it compressed when options were narrowing. "Fowler," she said. Caleb waited. "You said it yourself. Fowler was pressured into complicity. He's not a true believer in what Caldwell's building. He's a man who got caught in something and has been living with it." She pressed her hand over the envelope. "If someone gets to Fowler before Preston does, before Preston can tell him that federal interest is inbound and he needs to destroy records and disappear, Fowler might make a different choice," Caleb said. "He might make the right choice," she said. "Who gets to him?" She looked at him steadily. "You do." Caleb went still. "I'm the one with the documents," she said. "I'm the one who stays out of sight and keeps the evidence intact. You're the one who—" She paused. "You're a former federal marshal. You know how to talk to a man like Fowler. You know what to say and how to say it so it lands as real and not as threat." "It's half a day's ride back toward Oak Haven," he said. "I know. Fowler might already be in Preston's pocket by the time I get there." "He might be," she agreed. "That's the risk. And you'd be here alone with Tom and 10 of Preston's men on the property." She looked at him. "I've been alone in harder situations than this." "When?" he said. "The last 3 weeks," she said. "Before you walked into that square." He was quiet. She held his gaze. "Caleb, 4 days is too long to hold position if Preston is actively destroying evidence. Siringo needs the bank records to compel a federal case. Without them, the deposition is powerful, but it's one dead man's word against a sitting mayor with 20 years of institutional relationships." She paused. "Fowler is the bridge. Fowler's cooperation turns my father's deposition into a case they cannot walk away from." He knew she was right. She could see him knowing it, the specific expression of a man whose argument has already lost and who is deciding whether to finish making it anyway. He didn't. "Tom has to get his written testimony done tonight," he said. "Everything he witnessed, signed and dated. I'll sit with him and do it." If they search again, I'll handle it. Abigail. I will handle it, she said. Quiet. Final. The voice her father had used. He heard it. She could tell. I'll be back before Siringo arrives, he said. I know you will, she said. A pause. Don't let anything happen to those documents, he said. They're against my heart, she said. Same place they've been since Tom handed them to me. Something moved through his expression, fast, complicated, gone before she could fully read it. He moved to the gable opening, checked the angles below, waited for the moment when the men outside were concentrated at the house front and the barn's back shadow was empty. Then he dropped. She heard him land controlled quiet, the fall of a man who knew how to absorb ground. Then nothing. No shout, no alarm. He was already gone. She lay in the hayloft alone and listened to Preston's men finish their search and argue about next steps, and eventually settle into the particular restless stillness of people who have been told to hold position and dislike it. She had work to do. She waited until full dark. When the property was quiet enough, 2 men at the front, she estimated 2 more somewhere on the perimeter. The rest camped back at the tree line with the horses. She came down from the loft. Tom was in his kitchen. He looked up when she came in the back. They still out there, he said. Yes, but they're holding, not searching. They're waiting for us to show ourselves, or for Preston to send new orders. Which means we have some hours, Tom said. We have some hours, she confirmed. She sat down across from him and put paper on the table. Tell me everything. Start from the beginning, the first time you saw Caldwell's men come onto Carter property. Every conversation you witnessed. Every name. Every date you can place. Tom looked at the paper, then at her. Your daddy would be proud of you, he said. She didn't trust herself to respond to that directly. Start from the beginning, Tom, she said. He started. She wrote. They worked through the night with a single candle and low voices, and the kind of focused, careful attention that the situation required, and that neither of them had to be told to bring. Tom's memory was better than she'd expected, the specific memory of a man who had known something was wrong and had been paying attention accordingly, storing details he couldn't use yet, saving them for an eventual accounting that he'd apparently believed would come, even when the evidence against that belief was considerable. 3 hours in, he said something that stopped her hand. There was a meeting, Tom said, before I left Oak Haven. A month before. I wasn't supposed to know about it. I was on Carter land doing fence work, and they came to the south barn. Your daddy was there. Caldwell. Fowler. He paused. And a man I didn't recognize. Younger than Caldwell. Dressed well, not local. Brought papers. She looked up. Who was he? I don't know his name, Tom said. But I heard the end of it when they came out. Your daddy said he said it clear enough that I've never forgotten it. He said, I don't care how this is structured on paper. You're asking me to sign away what my father built, and my answer is no, and it will always be no. She held very still. And the man with the papers, she said. The one you didn't recognize. What did he say? Tom met her eyes. He said, Mr. Carter, I sincerely hope you reconsider, because the people I represent are not accustomed to no. The candle flame moved in a draft that came from nowhere. Not local, she said. Dressed well, brought papers. Tom Caldwell's operation runs through the county bank. But someone who dresses well and brings papers to a private meeting and speaks about people he represents. He's not the machine, Tom said slowly. He's the money behind the machine. She looked at the deposition, at the list of 6 families, at the structure her father had documented so carefully. It was bigger than one corrupt mayor. It had always been bigger. She wrote for another hour. When Tom's statement was complete, 12 pages signed and dated at the bottom with his full name and witnessed by her own signature, she sat back and looked at what they had. Her father's deposition, Tom's testimony, the Carter land documentation, the list of 6 families, and now at the edge of it, the shape of something larger. An investor, someone behind Caldwell, someone who sent representatives to private meetings about land that wasn't for sale, who spoke about people he represented, who had the posture of a man operating within a system rather than inventing one. Siringo needed to know. She added a page to the package, her own hand, noting Tom's account of the South Barn meeting, the description of the unknown man, the words he'd used. She sealed it. Then she lay down on Tom's kitchen floor because the chair was too upright for sleep and the bedroom felt too far, and she put the envelope under her hand and closed her eyes. She woke to Eddie's voice at the back door. Gray light, early morning, barely past first dark. "Miss Carter." Quiet, urgent. She was up in seconds. "What happened?" "Fowler," Eddie said. He was breathing hard. He'd been writing. "He's at the Cartwell Road, not Sunday. He left last night. Came through Ridgecrest at midnight, barely stopped." Clara saw him. He looked. Eddie searched for the word. Scared. Real scared. Like a man running from something he'd already decided to run from. She felt it before she understood it. He already knows. "Clara thinks Preston got to him yesterday evening," Eddie said, not to silence him. "She thinks Preston told him the federal situation and gave him a choice: cooperate with the cleanup or face prosecution alone." He paused. "And Fowler ran," she said. "Ran," Eddie confirmed. "But Clara says he didn't go west toward Caldwell's territory. He went east." East. Away from Oakhaven, away from Preston, toward Cartwell, and beyond Cartwell, if he kept going east toward the federal land office in the territory capital. "He's not running from the case," she said. The understanding arriving with the clean impact of something true. He's running toward something. "Caleb's already on the Cartwell Road," Eddie said. "Clara sent word to him last night when she saw Fowler come through." Of course she had. Of course he was already there. She grabbed the saddlebag. "Horses," she said. "Ready," Eddie said. "Tom's already saddled them." They moved fast out the back through the barn onto the horses before the gray light had fully committed to being morning. Tom came with them this time, his rifle across his saddle, and his expression saying clearly that he was done being told to stay behind. She didn't tell him to stay behind. The Cartwell Road was 2 hours east at a hard pace. She rode it thinking about Fowler, about the specific quality of fear that made a man get on a horse at midnight rather than face what the morning would bring. That wasn't the fear of a man who'd committed to Caldwell's cleanup. That was the fear of a man who'd looked at what he was being asked to do and found somewhere under the years of complicity and accumulated bad choices, something that couldn't say yes to it. She thought about Clara Boone telling 3 different men where they could go. She thought about Tom Aldridge rebuilding his fence line. She thought about her father writing 12 pages in careful ink and trusting them to a man he respected. People made the wrong choices until they didn't. Sometimes that was enough. The Cartwell Road was empty when they reached it, long and straight and dust pale in the early morning light, visible for a considerable distance in both directions. Caleb was there, standing beside his horse at the road's edge, not mounted, which meant he'd been waiting long enough to dismount for the horse's sake. He looked at her when she arrived with the expression she'd learned to read as his version of relief, minimal on the surface, present underneath. "Fowler," she said. "Stopped," Caleb said. "About a mile east. He's at a traveler's camp. He's been there since midnight, built a fire, didn't sleep." He paused. "He's waiting for something. Or deciding." "Did he see you?" "No." She looked east. "Has he been contacted by Preston's people since he ran?" "Not that I've seen. He's alone." She took the saddlebag off her horse, handed it to Tom. "Hold these." Tom looked at her. "I'm going in alone," she said. Both Tom and Caleb started to speak. "He's a frightened man making a decision," she said. "2 people approaching looks like pressure. A woman approaching alone." She met Caleb's eyes. "Looks like the truth." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "If he runs, I can talk faster than he can ride," she said. Caleb looked at her, the way he'd looked at her in the square, that specific attention that treated her as the most relevant thing in the immediate world. "If you're not back in 20 minutes, he said. "Give me 30, she said. She walked east, The travelers' camp was exactly where Caleb had set a small fire burning down to coals, a horse tied to a scrub oak, and a man sitting on a log with his hat in his hands, and the posture of someone who has been conducting an argument with himself for several hours and hasn't reached a resolution. Fowler heard her coming. He stood fast, startled, his hand going to a holster he apparently wasn't wearing, a reflexive reach for something he'd left behind. She stopped 10 feet away. "Mr. Fowler," she said. He stared at her. Then something in his face did something complicated and difficult. The expression of a man who has been caught not in the act of something, but in the act of trying to escape it. "Miss Carter," he said. "Sit down," she said, gently. "Please." He sat. She sat across from him on the other side of the dying fire. She looked at him in the early morning light, and he looked older than she remembered from the bank lobby. Older and smaller and considerably less armored than the man who had told her the bank's records were not available for public review. "I know what Preston told you," she said. He said nothing. "I know he came to you yesterday and told you that federal interest was inbound, that you needed to help him clean the records or you'd go down with everything else." Still nothing. "I know you ran," she said. "East, not west, away from Caldwell's territory." She paused. "That means something, Mr. Fowler." He looked at his hat. "I didn't know it would go this far," he said. His voice was rough. "In the beginning, when Caldwell covered the loan, I thought it was business, a favor with expectations. I didn't think—" He stopped. She waited. "The first family," he said. "The Harmons. When I saw what the debt notice actually was, what they were asking me to hold as legitimate bank documentation, I told Caldwell it was wrong." What did he say? Fowler was quiet for a moment. "He reminded me that without his coverage of my loan, I'd have lost everything I had, my house, my position." A long pause. "He said I was already in it whether I wanted to be or not. And the safest place to be in something like this was useful." She looked at him steadily. "So you were useful," she said. Not accusatory, just the truth laid flat. "Yes," he said. "And then it became easier to keep being useful than to stop." "Yes. And now there are 6 families who lost what they built," she said, "because the machine needed a bank officer who would hold fraudulent documents and call them legitimate." The fire put out a single small pop of heat between them. Fowler didn't answer. Because there was no answer that helped him. "My father knew," she said. "He documented it. He left a sworn deposition, your name is in it. He described 2 meetings where you were present. He described the documents." She looked at him. "That deposition is already on its way to a Pinkerton agent who works federal land fraud cases. Charles Siringo. He'll be here in 4 days." Fowler looked up. "When Siringo arrives," she said, "he will have authority to compel the bank records. He will have my father's testimony. Tom Aldridge's signed statement, the original Carter land documentation, and the record of 6 families who all received debt notices that didn't correspond to actual debts." She paused. "What he will need, what will determine whether you are a defendant or a witness, is someone inside the bank who can authenticate the fraudulent documents and testify about how they were created." The silence stretched. "If Preston reaches those records first," she said, "and destroys them, Siringo still has enough to build a federal case. It just gets harder. And your position becomes less cooperative witness and more primary facilitator." She held his gaze. "That's not where you want to be, Mr. Fowler." He looked at her for a long time. She waited. "If I testify," he said slowly, "if I give Siringo everything, the documents, the mechanism, the timeline." He stopped. "I still participated. I still held those records. I still—" "Yes," she said, "you did, and you'll face consequences for it." She didn't soften it. It was not the moment for softening. But the difference between consequences you face as a cooperating witness and consequences you face as a co-conspirator in a federal fraud case is not a small difference, Mr. Fowler. He looked at his hands. "Your father," he said. "I met him. Twice. He paused. He was a decent man. When he came to me about the lien, I could have told him the truth then. I could have told him the document was fraudulent and given him the evidence and ended it. Why didn't you? A long pause. Because I was afraid, Fowler said. The same reason everyone in that square looked away. She thought about that. Thought about the blacksmith and the schoolteacher and the woman from the dress shop. About the accumulated weight of a whole town's deliberate looking away. The difference between you and them, she said, is that you can still do something about it. He looked up. They looked away in a moment, she said. You have the chance to look forward. That's different. That's harder, and it's different, and it matters more. Something shifted in his face. Not dramatically, but permanently. What do I do? He said. She reached into her jacket. She pulled out the extra pages she'd written her own account of Tom's description of the South Barn meeting. The unknown investor. The words spoken. She held it out. Start by telling me who the man was, she said. The one who came to my father with papers. The one who spoke about people he represented. Fowler looked at the pages. His jaw worked. His name is Gerald Marsh, he said. He represents a land investment consortium operating out of Chicago. They've been buying distressed properties across 4 territories through exactly this mechanism, identifying land they want, using local political infrastructure to manufacture debt, and legal pressure completing transfers at a fraction of market value. He paused. Caldwell isn't the architect. He's the local operator. Marsh and the consortium are the system. She wrote the name. Gerald Marsh, Chicago. 4 territories. The shape of it finally fully visible, not a corrupt small-town mayor, not even a county-level fraud, but a regional mechanism operating across multiple states, using local corruption as its instrument, reaching into communities and dismantling what families had spent generations building. 6 families in Oak Haven County. How many in the other 3 territories? Will you tell Siringo this? She said. Yes, Fowler said. And then with the specific weight of a man who has finally finished choosing yes, all of it. She stood. Come with me, she said. There are people I want you to meet. When she walked back down the Cartwell Road with Fowler beside her, she could see Caleb at the edge of her sightline standing where she'd left him watching. She could see the moment he understood from her posture and her pace that it had gone the way she'd said it would. She watched him. Not say I told you so in the specific way people don't say things they never doubted enough to bother saying. Tom looked at Fowler. Fowler looked at Tom. 2 men who had both been inside Caldwell's machine in different ways, looking at each other across a summer morning on the Cartwell Road, with the full complicated weight of that between them. Tom extended his hand. Fowler took it. She didn't comment on that. Some things didn't need annotation. Siringo arrived on the 3rd day, not the 4th. He came with 2 federal deputies and a sealed order from the Territorial Land Office and the manner of a man who had been doing this long enough that the size of what he was walking into registered in his face as interest rather than alarm. He was shorter than she'd imagined. Compact and precise with sharp eyes that moved between her and Caleb and the accumulated documentation spread across Tom Aldridge's kitchen table with the organized hunger of someone encountering exactly what he'd hoped to find. He read the deposition first, then Tom's statement, then her addendum about Fowler and Gerald Marsh and the Chicago Consortium. He read all of it twice. Then he looked at her. Your father built a solid case, he said. He was a thorough man, she said. He knew what he was doing. Yes, she said. He did. Siringo looked at Caleb. Something passed between them that had the quality of a long conversation compressed into 3 seconds, the specific communication of 2 people who have history and have decided the present matters more than the past. Hayes, Siringo said. Siringo, Caleb said. Good to see you on the right side of a case. Always was, Caleb said. Siringo looked at Fowler, who had spent the previous 2 days at Tom's table, going through his own memory, with the methodical, guilt-driven precision of a man building penance into usefulness. You'll testify to everything, Siringo said. Not a question. Everything, Fowler said. Including Marsh. Including Marsh. Siringo nodded once. He looked at the deputies. We ride for Oakhaven this afternoon. I want Caldwell served before nightfall. He looked at Abigail. Do you want to be there? She thought about it. She thought about the square. About the rope and the faces that looked away, and the document held out like it was already decided, and the mayor standing at the center of it like a man delivering justice. She thought about her father, who had spent his last healthy months alone, afraid building something, so that she wouldn't have to face it empty-handed. Yes, she said. I want to be there. They rode for Oakhaven in the afternoon. Siringo and his deputies, and Fowler and Tom and Caleb and Abigail, a procession that grew quieter the closer they got to town, the way groups get quiet when they're approaching something that can't be undone. She rode next to Caleb. They didn't talk much. They'd said most of what needed saying over 3 days at Tom's table in the spaces between working through documents and coordinating with Siringo, and sleeping in shifts and eating whatever Tom put in front of them. They'd said it in the practical sideways manner of two people who were becoming something they hadn't planned on becoming, and were handling it by continuing to be useful in the present tense. Once in the very early morning of the second day, she'd found him standing outside looking north toward the mountains, toward the high country, toward 6 years of solitude he'd broken by walking into Oakhaven Square. She'd stood beside him. Do you miss it? She said. The mountains. He thought about it. Sometimes. Are you going back? A pause. Longer than most of his pauses, which were already longer than most people's. I don't know yet, he said. She nodded. That's honest, she said. Only kind I know, he said. She smiled, a real one, fully arrived, not managed. The first one in longer than she could place. He saw it. He didn't comment. But she saw him store it, the way he stored everything that mattered, quietly, without ceremony, in the place where things you intend to keep live. Harold Caldwell was in his office when Siringo served the federal warrant. She stood in the doorway of the Oakhaven mayor's office and watched a man who had run a county for 22 years understand in the space of 90 seconds that it was over. Not county over, not an embarrassment that money and institutional relationships could absorb and redirect. Over. Federal warrants carried a weight that local complicity couldn't cushion. Gerald Marsh's name in the documentation meant the Chicago money was exposed, which meant the people who'd been comfortable with Caldwell's operation were now calculating their own exposure and deciding that distance was more valuable than loyalty. Caldwell looked at the warrant, then at Siringo, then for exactly 1 second at Abigail standing in the doorway. She held his gaze. She didn't speak. She let the silence do what silence had been doing in this town for 4 years, but this time it meant something different. This time, it meant that the truth had arrived and didn't need announcing. Preston Caldwell was arrested at the family house 20 minutes later. He had the look of a man who had understood sometime in the last 48 hours that the thing he'd been chasing Abigail Carter for was not a document. It was a case, and she'd been building it while he was building a chase, and he'd been running after the wrong thing the whole time. She didn't feel satisfaction watching it. She felt something quieter and more durable than satisfaction. She felt her father standing next to her. Not literally, she was clear-eyed about that. But the particular sensation of continuing something a person loved had started of carrying a weight they'd built, and carrying it to where it needed to go felt like presence. It felt like the closest thing to him she was going to have, and it was enough. It was more than enough. Siringo came to her that evening after Caldwell was in federal custody, and the bank had been sealed for evidence, and the town of Oakhaven had spent an afternoon being very quiet in the specific way of people processing information that requires them to revise significant assumptions. The Carter property, Siringo said. The debt notice was fraudulent. The lien was illegally recorded, and the original documentation you've provided establishes clear title. The land is yours. She absorbed that. Just sat with it for a moment. All of it, the fence posts, the house her grandfather built, the fields her father worked for 30 years, still hers. Had always been hers. The fraud hadn't changed the truth of it, only threatened it. "Thank you," she said. "Thank your father," Siringo said. "I do," she said. "Every day." He left her there. She found Caleb at the edge of town, where the road pointed north toward elevation and distance, and the high country he'd come from. He was looking that direction, with the particular quality of attention she'd learned, was not absence, was in fact a very specific presence, the presence of a man weighing things. She stood beside him. "Siringo wants a formal statement from you," she said. "Your observations from the square, the pursuit, the mining claim." "I know," he said. "I'll give it." He also mentioned, she said carefully, that the Federal Land Office has an investigative position he's been trying to fill for a year. Someone who knows high country, knows how property fraud operates from the inside. She paused. "Someone he trusts." Caleb was quiet. "He mentioned that," Caleb said. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I'd think about it." She looked at him. He looked back. "Are you thinking about it?" she said. "Yes," he said. "I'm also thinking about other things." She waited. "Carter land needs work," he said. "You've been gone several days. Fence line probably needs checking." She looked at him. He looked at her. "I know fence work," he said, simply, without performance. She thought about her father saying, "I gave you too much protection and not enough credit." She thought about what it meant to accept help from someone who offered it honestly and without conditions, who had walked into a square because something in him couldn't walk past it, who had carried 6 years of loss in the mountains and come down for supplies, and found apparently something he hadn't planned on finding. "The fence line does need checking," she said. "Then I'll check it," he said. The summer evening settled around them warm and gold and unhurried. The kind of evening that made the whole day feel like it had been building toward exactly this particular quality of light and air and stillness. Oak Haven would take a time to become itself again. Real justice, the kind that rebuilt what fraud had taken, that restored what deliberate silence had allowed to be stolen, didn't arrive with a warrant and then recede. It had to be tended. Watched. The 6 families on her father's list had cases pending now. Restitution proceedings that Siringo had already set in motion, a federal record that Gerald Marsh's Chicago consortium could not outrun. It would take time. She was prepared to take time. She was prepared to stand on Carter land and tend what her father had built, and trust that the truth, once set down in ink and sworn to, and carried by people who refused to look away, had a permanence that outlasted the men who'd tried to bury it. She looked north, toward the mountains, toward the high country that had kept this man whole for 6 years until he was ready to come back down. She looked at Caleb. He was already looking at her, and in the full warm light of that summer evening, Abigail Carter understood something her father had always known, that the people worth standing next to were not the ones who showed up when it was easy, but the ones who walked into the square when every other face had looked away and stayed. She had that now. She had the land. She had the truth on the record, and her father's name attached to it, and 6 families who would not lose what they'd built. She had enough. She had everything.